With Firestorm's duos releasing today, it seems all the more relevant to be talking about what the best weapons are to be using in Battlefield 5's Firestorm, and thus with specific focus on solos and duos, but of course also of relevance to the squad gameplay, we're going to be covering what the best Firestorm weapons are available in today's video, covering the basics of weapon selections, the best weapons for the different engagement distances available, and of course what the best combinations and loadouts of weapons are to be using when fighting alone, in small teams, or in a squad. With that being said, let's jump straight into the basics to cover those quickly before we jump into a little bit more detailed, complex stuff, talking about the individual weapon engagement distances. So for the basics, the three things that stand as rules, at least for me, are the following. You need to be able to use the weapon that you pick up. If you're a horrible shot when it comes to accuracy with snipers, semi-automatics, or SLRs, don't pick them up. There's no point in using or carrying around a weapon that you're actually not capable of using effectively. You're more the automatic fire guy, go with the STG-44 instead, and leave the Kar 98 to your friend who's much better at sniping, or just to the next player who comes around and picks it up if you're playing in a solo mode. The second point then is that specializations and rarity levels don't mean all that much. Yes, base tier weapons have no specializations. The second tier of weaponry, the blue weapons, they have 2 specializations, and the epics, the pinks, they have 4 specializations. And specializations are great, but that doesn't mean that you should be trading them against other weapons necessarily of lower tier. A Tommy gun is a lot better choice, even if it's just a regular load tier 2 for close encounter combat, for actually any situation almost, than say a epic tier MP40, simply because of the situations in which these weapons excel and the damage they put out. The same could be going for an Sten gun comparison to an STG-44. All the more important is to pay attention to the scopes on the weapons, because an STG-44 epic may be a fantastic weapon in the right hands, but if you hate fully automatic firing weapons with a high magnification scope on them, you're going to have a tough time using the STG-44, and it may be better that you stick to a tier 2 blue level STG with the usual red dot sight on it, then upgrade to that tier 3 if you're not capable of using the higher magnification optic. Something to keep in mind as you play a little bit more Firestorm. You'll start to learn which weapons you perform well with and which weapons are better just left lying where you found them. Lastly then is flexibility is key. When it comes to your arsenal selection, you need a variety of weaponry that can engage at a variety of engagement distances, preferably with close to no overlap in their ideal engagement distance. So if you're running with a shotgun up close, you don't need an SMG to go alongside with it. Either take a medium focused assault rifle, a semi-automatic SLR, or bolt action rifle. If you're running with a bolt action rifle, again, don't necessarily go with a Gewehr 43 semi-automatic or a ZH-29 SLR. You're cannibalizing each other's engagement distance and have very little if you suddenly get surprised by somebody in close encounter combat. But speaking of course of those engagement distances, we need to cover which weapons are best at what engagement distances. And we start of course in close quarters, where the choices really are 2 of the SMGs, namely the Suomi and the Tommy gun, and all of the available shotguns. And while not everybody will like what I'm saying here, I recommend you stay away from the shotguns. Both the Suomi and the Tommy gun are excellent choices. We'll cover a little bit more which one I prefer for what reasons later on in the video, but either of those is a fine and good choice. The problem with shotguns is that they're not only extraordinarily range limited, far more than the Tommy gun or the Suomi, and really only good in building clearing scenarios, with a few other fortunate exceptions, but also in addition to that, they are usually in the normal multiplayer experience very reliant on their one-shot kill potential, which is non-existent in the Firestorm experience for the simple reason that players are running around between 150 and 300 health. And while you may occasionally be able to one-shot kill somebody at 150 health with the right shotgun, I can guarantee you you're not going to be one-shotting anybody who's got 1, 2, or 3 armor plates equipped. You're actually going to need 2, 3, maybe even more shots if not all your pellets hit. And somebody running a Tommy gun in that scenario is going to have a far easier time not only taking you out, but also making it very difficult for you to aim. By strafing back and forward, he doesn't have too much trouble still getting his shots in. He's using a fully automatic spray and pray weapon. You, on the other hand, with a shotgun, are highly accuracy reliant and thus at a significant disadvantage. I tend to drop shotguns as soon as I pick up any decent weapon, especially if I get an SMG towards the start of the game. Moving from the close quarter to the close medium range, things get a little bit more interesting here. We have once again a couple of SMGs, in this case the MP40 and the Sten gun, But we also have one of the assault rifles, namely the Sturmgewehr 15, or for short SG-15, and one of the LMGs, specifically the FG-42, which is essentially an LMG variant of the Sturmgewehr 15, as talked about in the respective weapon reviews I did on both of those weapons. Now, the problem with using the MP40 and the Bren Gun are that they can excel in extreme close quarters because of their lack of damage output. Whether they have great hipfire or not, you're going to be coming up against Tommy guns and up against shotguns, which will outdamage you relatively easy. And at medium range, that's to say anything from 30 meters onwards, you really are facing a situation where your damage is, well, just simply less on a bullet to kill basis than pretty much everybody else out there. Specifically the Sturmgewehr 15 and the FG-42, of course. The other problem with this category of weaponry is actually, and why I usually don't run with any of these weapons, although I would recommend the SG-15 and the FG-42 over the Sten and the MP40, is that the close medium range is very much cannibalized by medium range weaponry and by close quarter weaponry. It's sitting between those two categories of weaponry that have some very, very strong contenders in them. Namely, for close quarters, the previously mentioned Suomi and, of course, Tommy gun. Thus, if you have to, or you want to pick up one of these weapons, stick with the Sturmgewehr 15 or the FG-42 if you want the bipod. Know that you're trading a smaller magazine in for it. However, this also depends, of course, what kind of ammunition you have available. But personally, I tend to upgrade to an STG-44 or any of the other medium range available weapons, or a close quarter weapon, and leave the close medium range weapons lying for somebody else to pick up. Speaking then of those medium range weapons, this is one of my favorite categories of weaponry because, as mentioned previously, flexibility of engagement distance is so very important, and weapons such as the STG-44, primarily it's actually for a matter of fact, but also the M1A1 carbine offer just that, a great flexibility in terms of the engagement distances they can engage at. As we'll talk about a little bit later when we go over the overall best weapons and in what combination to use them, the STG-44 really is capable of taking on enemies in close quarters, close medium range, and even medium long range, not however the extreme long ranges. And it's why it's one of my favorite weapons for Battle Royale specifically. The M1A1 is also good, but depending on whether you prefer kind of the semi-auto or the fully auto weaponry, you're going to pick either the STG over it or the M1A1 carbine over the STG. Moving on, of course, to the medium long range. This once again is a very effective class of weaponry, coming in with weapons such as the Bren Gun, the Gewehr 43, and the ZH-29. I can recommend all of these weapons, but if I have to recommend one of them, it's going to be the Bren Gun. Don't underestimate the power of a fully automatic weapon that you can essentially fully mag dump on a target all the way out to essentially 75 meters, and if you bipod it, as far as you want. That tier 3 Bren Gun with the high magnification optic, that beautiful 31 rounds in the magazine, is an absolute beast, and it's actually won me a couple of games already. Don't dismiss it out of hand, and it's also a very good weapon to pick up at the start of the game if you have only low tier weapons around you, because as it is a low recoil LMG, it doesn't benefit as much from the specializations that it gets equipped with at the later stages of the tier 2 and tier 3 version of it as weapons such as, for example, the Tommy gun or the STG-44, which are relatively unruly without their high-end upgrades reducing the horizontal recoil on them. That's not to say that the ZH-29 or the Gewehr 43 are not effective weapons, they are just extraordinarily accuracy reliant. And the problem with that in Battlefield 5 Firestorm is that once you put one or two shots into your enemy, they're going to start moving like crazy. They're not going to be dead because they have more health than in the base multiplayer game, and that they're going to be making themselves a very, very, very difficult target for you to shoot at. That's where fully automatic weapons or weapons that do all of their damage in one shot, in my opinion, have an advantage over them. Thus, my personal choice for the medium long range category of weaponry is definitely the Bren Gun. On to the last category of weaponry then, the long-range weaponry. And here, of course, we have the two bolt-action rifles, the Enfield and the Kar 98. Both of these are effective weapons to pick up if you are an effective sniper, because there's no better way than to start an engagement by taking somebody 150 to 200 health down by putting a perfect headshot on them. I found a lot of my engagements starting off with me sneaking up on an enemy, getting the drop on my enemy. And if there's one weapon that's going to succeed at doing as much damage before they can realize you're there and before they can try to take evasive maneuvers, get behind covers and fire back, it's going to be a bolt-action rifle, specifically a headshot, but even a body shot, doing anywhere between something like 60, 75, or 80 damage, depending on which weapon you're using. Now this is personal preference, whether you go for the Enfield, faster fire rate, larger mag, or for the Kar 98. I, for the reasons and the way I use the bolt action rifles that I just explained, prefer the Kar 98. Higher minimum damage, meaning I just get more damage from that one shot I'm placing down range. And also, in the epic tier, the Kar 98 actually comes with a full scope and not one of those horrible blurry iron sights that can be quite tricky to use. And thus is really effective then, and quite dangerous to be fighting up against if you don't know where that sniper is, because he can take you out in almost one shot unless you've got some real heavy armor on, and well, it can be very difficult to find out where he is if he's stationary or held up in some kind of covered position. But having talked about all the weapons, you may have noticed that we're missing one. And that is, of course, the MMG, the MG42. And I've left it out of this comparison, not only because it is essentially effective at any range once bipoded, and only in close quarters when not bipoded, and thus it's very difficult to put in any of the categories out there, but also because it's a weapon I wouldn't recommend for solo play. Yes, it's an extremely powerful weapon, and I think it's actually legitimate to use in Firestorm Battle Royale mod, and far less annoying and difficult to counter than, say, in the usual Battlefield multiplayer. So I have no problem with the MG42 in Firestorm. What I do think, however, is that it essentially is reliant on other squad mates taking up different kinds of positioning, covering you, and also just creating general chaos. I've seen the MG42 by far most effectively used in full squads, where everybody's running different weaponry. Somebody's got a swarmy, another person's got an STG, another person may be using a bolt action rifle, and one person puts down a huge amount of suppressive fire and distracts all the enemies by throwing down his MG42 and just hosing a couple people. While that happens, the sniper picks off the armor, and the other two with the STG and Swarmy are moving in for the close quarter finishes. That's the ideal scenario, and that's why squad play is so enjoyable in Battlefield 5's Firestorm. On a solo mode, however, the MG42 is just not flexible enough. It requires you to go bipod unless you're in close quarters, and even there, I prefer a Tommy gun to an MG42 even at 10 meter engagement distance, not only because it will excel at 20 meters as well, but also because it's just more accurate of a weapon, and accuracy is very important, sustained accuracy in Battlefield 5's Firestorm because of the high amount of health. You may disagree with me, let me know down below in the comments if you do, but that's my take on the MG42, specifically for a solo player or duo modes loadout. But speaking of loadouts then, what are the best combinations? And what category and criteria do these kind of weapons need to come from and fulfill to be the best loadout there is? Well, for me, loadouts, as I previously mentioned, are all about flexibility, but at the same time, being ideal for the kind of engagement distances I'm going to be facing at that stage of the game. So I will actually shift my loadout from more long range to more close medium range the later I get into a round of Firestorm, because I can almost guarantee you 9 out of 10 Firestorm games, when there's only 2 or 3 people left, are decided in close to medium ranges and not at long ranges. That being said, however, I'm not going to give up a tier 3 Kar 98 really for anything in the game, and that's because of its range flexibility, and the same goes for the STG-44. And thus, amongst my favorite combinations are the STG-44 with the Kar 98, because the STG-44 really is capable of doing all the way up until close quarters. It's only got a fire rate disadvantage of about 120 rounds versus a Tommy gun, and it's capable of then damaging all the way out, I'd argue, to 75 meters, especially if it is that epic level 3 tier weapon. Because put your high magnification STG into the semi-auto mode and tap away at enemies with close to no recoil across the entire map. You'll find yourself doing very effective damage with something that usually is reserved for more close medium range combat. The Kar 98, of course, being the ultimate weapon to opening up a firefight with a headshot, taking somebody down from, say, 300 health, well, 150 health and 150 armor, somewhere down into the 100 health region. You can then just hose them down with your STG. That's the end of them. My favorite weapon combination by far. But closely followed by it is a combination of a close quarter focused SMG and something like a Bren Gun or a Gewehr 43. In essence, one of the close quarter weapons that succeed very well and one of the medium long range weapons. And that is for the simple reason that weapons such as the Bren and the Gewehr 43 are capable of dealing with medium range targets as well, even towards the medium close quarter in the case of the Bren. And from that point onwards, well, the Swarmy or the Tommy gun are very capable choices as well. Essentially, you've got everything covered but extremely long ranges, which anywhere from, I'd argue, the mid to late game are going to become irrelevant. Also, at those engagement distances, unless you get one shot hit by a sniper, you can hide behind cover, heal up, let the enemy come to you, and then have an advantage against them if they're still using their bolt-action rifle. As previously mentioned, I prefer the Bren Gun over the Gewehr 43 because I prefer the fully automatic weapon and I think it's a little bit more flexible, but also of the Suomi versus Tommy debate, I'd actually go on the basis of whether you can get one of them at epic tier, because then you have a 50-shot mag, which is extremely useful, but other than that, I'll actually prefer the Tommy gun over the Suomi gun. The slightly lower fire rate does mean it's slightly less effective in close quarters, yes, but the Tommy gun is still essentially the second most effective weapon in close quarter just after the Suomi, and thus usually you're not coming up against somebody with a significantly better weapon, but because it's lower fire rate and slightly less recoil, it's just ever so slightly more medium range or close medium range capable. And flexibility, as I previously mentioned, is an important trait. You get surprised by an enemy who's at 25 meters, 30 meters, and you've got a Tommy gun in your hand, you're going to be a lot better off than if you had a Suomi in your hand. That's not the same, of course, if you're within 10 meters, but then again, the Tommy gun will do its job just fine. Lastly then, for the third loadout, a general piece of advice. Of course, you can't always get a Kar 98 and an STG, or a Tommy and something like a Bren Gun. Some of these weapons are quite rare and difficult to find, specifically level 3 STG and Kar 98, they seem to evade me almost every single round. A Gewehr 43 at epic level is also something I've seen relatively rarely. That being said though, I'd always recommend, unless you have a better setup, to run with an SMG towards the end of the game, because the end of the game ends up being a close quarter fight and you don't want to be facing off with a Bren Gun against somebody using a Tommy gun. It's happened to me, I've been lucky enough to win those rounds nevertheless because my enemy was, well, absolute potato, but against a competent, skilled enemy, he will take you out no problem. And having something at least as close quarter capable as an STG, my opinion, is mandatory for going for the final few kills in any kind of solo, duels, or even squad game mode. If you can't compete at close quarters, you can't win a game of Battlefield 5 Firestorm unless with an extreme amount of luck, or if for some reason the round ends early at a more kind of larger playing field, which is extremely open and you can snipe everybody away. Unlikely, but can happen. With all that being said though, we're at the end of talking about what the best weapons are in Battlefield 5's Firestorm. And while I've explained my choices, I believe, quite rationally, I am of course well aware there will be people who disagree with my choices for the best weapons and best weapons combinations. Feel free to leave me those reasons why you disagree or agree, as well as of course your usual feedback and video suggestions down below in the comments, or hit me up with them on Twitter. If you enjoyed this video, found it helpful or interesting, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. But with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching, and hope to see you in the next Battlefield 5 video.